You know how we go. You know how we go.
Alright, getting ready, need to turn out a few messages.
Introducing, ladies and gentlemen, the wickedest rhythm in the world.
Ruben, what we are gonna do then? Slew them. Who them? Well done. Yo, so me say again. Slew them and fear feelings them a carry. Them done for already and them can't say them sorry, yeah. Slew them and fear feelings them a carry. You know what, grab something again. Wait for what you with him. Who them a could have what that them a try. Them got this thing till I see what you all like them die, yeah. Who them a make us with them with them spell. Then this the money well and them go down and hey, yeah. Who them a could have who them walk us. Them this Marcus I know them all by the dust, yeah. Who them a make us tell them to clear. Tell them can't this mama hurt. You know see a dead man them. Don't be man them. Not no with them. If I can't be born them. Them don't condemn. I be a dead man them. Them don't not like me. Me don't not like them. Tell them some men and keep no funny man friend. Tell them some men and keep no sada my friend. Them go to blow me at the raggy road them. That's why I am. Friend and one them me see them. Who them a could have what that them a try. Them this king still I say what you all of them die out. Who them a make us see them with them spell. Them this same and me well like them so yaga hell. Who them a could have what that them a try. Them got this king still I say what you all of them die out. Who them a make us see them with them spell. Them this same and me well like them so yaga hell. Who them a could have who them walk us. Them this Marcus I know them all by the dust, yeah. Who them a make us tell them to clear. Tell them can't this mama hurt. You know see a dead man them. Don't be man them. Not no with them. If I can't be born them. Them don't condemn. I be a dead man them. Them don't not like me. Me don't not like them. Tell them some men and keep no funny man friend. Tell them some men and keep no sada my friend. Them go to blow me at the raggy road them. That's why I am. Friend and one them me see them. Who them a could have what that them a try. Them this thing still I say what you all like them die out. Who them a make us see them with them spell. Them this same and me well like them so yaga hell.
and welcome to Fresh Air Sci-Fi. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And tonight we are going to be discussing Rationality. But before that, we do have a couple of things to discuss. Now, I've taken down some questions that we've had on previous shows and some other points. So, in fact, there's one main one for you tonight, Dave.
Yeah.
It's from Jared, and it was from...
Hello, Jared.
Yeah, it's from a quickfire round a couple of days, or a couple of shows ago, should I say. And he said, when we asked the question, is there one religion that, if there was one religion that had to be true, which one would it be? And you replied Janism. He would like to know why you picked that one.
Okay, I don't remember the question had to be true.
If there was one religion to be true, wasn't it?
Okay, I must have misheard you. Because, yeah, I thought you said if there was one religion you thought was okay, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that was sort of the thing. If there was one religion that you would, if that was going to be true, which one would you pick? Was what my intention of that question was. Do apologise if it came across incorrectly, or I've repeated it incorrectly.
Okay. Well, mostly just because it's very peaceful and very sort of virtue-centered. Teaches a lot of respect. That kind of thing. I mean, if you were to class Confucianism as a religion, that's the one I would wish was true.
Oh, okay. I suppose it's more a set of principles, although I suppose it did sort of get made into a religion in a way, didn't it?
Yeah, it's mostly philosophy with like duty and virtue and stuff like that, set around customs and that kind of thing.
I suppose plenty of things actually technically do get made into a religion as well, though, don't they? I mean, even the Pythagoreans sort of elevated him to an almost godlike status, didn't they? So
they did, yeah.
I suppose he just knew more about triangles, and that was convincing enough to say he was a god.
He knew some of the fabric of the universe.
And that's all it takes. Could you imagine if we actually went back to, a couple of thousand or even more years ago, we would genuinely seem like all-knowing gods to these people, just because our knowledge of medicine, science, philosophy, etc. is just that, even that little bit more. Even probably the most ignorant person today might even seem more well-known and godlike to people back then. It's interesting. Maybe we should come back to that at another point ourselves and discuss that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the things that's said, isn't it? A god would be indistinguishable from an extremely advanced civilization to a civilization that's not quite as advanced.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or a civilization would seem like God that was very advanced to a less advanced civilization. Sorry, I'm very tired this evening. You'll have to forgive me a little.
Oh, yeah, don't worry, Dave. I'm a little bit tired myself. I've had one of those long days at work, followed by long discussions this afternoon and this evening on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, you've seen some of them play out. They have been a little bit frustrating, can we say. They've inspired a lot of different conversation and a lot of topics we're going to tackle over the coming weeks, and it's what sort of inspired tonight's conversation on rationality. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like overly angry or anything like that. These conversations are things that are great to have. It's why I choose to have conversations with people instead of ridiculing them. And this was one of the big conversations. We had a few people respond to that that video that we posted about do ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule. And that they didn't respond on the original day, but a lot of people responded on a re-release. That wasn't actually supposed to go out today. I'd set up our feeds to, in a month's time, re-release things just so people who hadn't seen it would be aware. But for some reason, it threw them all into the feed today and has started re-releasing the videos from Twitch already. So
Always the way.
yeah.
Whenever you have one of those days, life goes out to make it even more one of those days.
Yeah. And from the responses we got, some of them were even to the quick fire round, not even the actual video, but I could tell from the stats and the responses that people just responded to the question rather than actually listening or watching the video. So I suppose in some respects, is there any real point in us addressing them on the video if they didn't watch the first one?
Yeah, it's a standard thing these days, though, isn't it? Just respond to the headline.
Yeah, headline culture is amazing. There are a number of articles that I wrote in the past. In fact, you've even done one over the last year, haven't you? Where we've basically put slightly misleading titles. They're not, but they are slightly misleading titles that people are going to respond to and show that they haven't even read the first paragraph of the article, which explains why we've used that title. I mean, sometimes you do write a short title anyway, because otherwise you end up with titles that are longer than the first paragraph, trying to explain everything that you're trying to discuss anyway. So one of mine from ages ago was, why do Christians and Muslims reject evolution? And the first line was like, it's one of these widely accepted theories and facts, but even then, there are still some Christians and Muslims that reject it. So this article's hoping to discuss that. And, instantly you just get people going, it's not all Christians, it's not all Muslims. It's like, have you read the article? Clearly not, because the first paragraph states that. You did one as well, which was talking about the faith of science. Now, faith is a big trigger word in the atheist community. Faith and belief are always seen as irrational things, or at least nearly always seen as irrational things, especially with the sort of atheists that we find on the internet. Now, that's not saying they all see it that way. Of course, I mean, that would be a massive blanket claim in and of itself, and that's not true either. But it is interesting, the psychology behind it.
It is, and a lot of them seem to think it's faith is believing things that are evidently not true, which isn't what the word means.
No. Or they sometimes say it's believing things without evidence as well.
Yeah,
And again, that's not necessarily what it is. At the end of the day, a word like faith essentially just means trust.
yeah, mostly.
Yeah, I mean, there is more to it than that, and obviously there are the religious connotations and everything, but at the end of the day, the bulk of it is faith pretty much just means trust.
Trust, yeah. I mean, a lot of religious people have trust that their belief is true, and they have trust in the God that they believe in to have some sort of influence in their life. I mean, you could, I suppose, argue that it's believing something that's evidently not true, but to most religious people, it's not evidently not true.
No,
Otherwise,
yeah, I mean, one of the common things they do is they say it's self-evident, don't they?
yeah.
They truly believe that it is something that is completely self-evident. And I don't fully understand how someone can make that claim, because if it was something that was truly self-evident, then everyone would be able to see it, wouldn't they? Isn't that what self-evident basically means?
It depends. You could have like a localized version of self evident, I guess, where it's self evident to the person making the claim, but maybe nobody else.
That's true, but that's generally not how it's also used in that context, is it? They're talking about how it's self-evident to everyone that the world is clearly created by God and everything like that.
Oh, yeah. They call it a basic belief, basically,
Yeah.
which is a belief that needs no real foundation because it just is evidently true. To put it in a sloppy way, but an easy to understand way.
Yeah, definitely. So, this sort of brought us on to our subject of rationality, and there's a few things that we obviously need to discuss on it. I just noted down a couple of things. So yeah, obviously today with the conversations that came out on that ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule, a lot of people just went, yes, they do, and that was the only thing, or they always do. And I had a few conversations with people. Some of them turned into positive conversations, and they
That's always good.
reconsidered their thoughts, and they were like, okay, well maybe ridicule isn't always the best way to do. Sometimes it just gets that way. Sometimes you can think that they're ridiculous, which of course you can. You can always think they're ridiculous, but the way you approach them and try and get them to change their mind and stop being so dangerous, etc., can be done in a much more positive way. But again, there were a few that were less than positive and ended up being incredibly ridiculous, to the point where someone said that it's self-evident that ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule. This is someone that also said to me that it was irrational to have a belief without evidence. And when I've asked them for evidence on both of these statements, they went, it's self-evident.
Okay.
Which, did sort of give me a chuckle. I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah. I don't find it self-evident that ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule.
No.
I mean, this kind of started, about a decade and a half ago or a decade ago with Christopher Hitchens memes and Dawkins memes. Ridicule them, bully them, make fun of them. Ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule. There's a lot of beliefs I find ridiculous that come from other atheists. Should I be ridiculing them?
Yeah, I think even the ridiculous beliefs deserve ridicule is a ridiculous belief if you believe it to be true. So does that mean I should ridicule you? Who decides what's ridiculous? And it's like we said in the last video, isn't it basically victim blaming? Is there not a better way to do it? What's your purpose of having these conversations with people? Because if you're looking to change their mind, then chances are ridicule's not going to work. There's a big difference between, say, someone who I trust, respect, have a good rapport with, like Dave, turning around to me and going, Joe, you sound like a moron, and some randomer on the internet going, oh, it answers in reason, you sound like a fucking moron. Because I have a lot of respect for Dave. I trust his opinion on a lot of things. I often check things with him to make sure my logic's right. So if he suddenly turns around to me and says I'm sounding like a moron, then, or that I've got a ridiculous belief, then I'll go back and I'll have a think about it. But if it's some random idiot on the internet that I don't really have any rapport with, I'm not going to take it on board. So if the purpose is to change your mind, that's not the best way to go about it. Not until they've actually built the rapport with me and had a good friendship, and then maybe gone, do you realise that this one seems a bit iffy? Maybe think about it a bit more. And at which point I might go, oh, okay, yeah, we've had lots of good conversations, we've agreed on a lot of things, and all of a sudden you've thrown that in there. But then, if that's not your purpose, if you're just doing it for fun, how different are you from a bully in the playground, taking the piss out of a kid who has decided that he likes My Little Pony and he's got a My Little Pony lunchbox and you're teasing him for it? Well, leave the kid alone. He can like My Little Pony if he wants. It doesn't matter. Why does it matter to you what he likes? So this whole thing is kind of showing a lot of bad behaviours that the atheist community actually have, and the reason Sorry, carry on, Dave.
Sorry, well, I was just going to say that's one of the reasons why I said, would the world be better off without religion? Well, no, it would be the same, just in a different way.
Yeah, and you're probably right there. Because look at us, we're tribal creatures, atheism may not be a religion, but we're sort of being incredibly tribal with it. We are taking the piss out of others for their beliefs. And as I said in the last show, something like evolution would sound incredibly ridiculous to someone that didn't believe in it. It doesn't matter that there's a load of evidence there. Who decides what's ridiculous, should I say? And that was another thing that came up today. The first point was that the consensus is what shows what is ridiculous. To which point I said, well, if that is the case, if the general consensus is what makes something ridiculous or not, or decides if something is rational or not, then actually there's more theists than there are atheists. So the general consensus is there is at least one God. So does that make atheists the irrational ones here? Like, well, no. And it's like it's the massive consensus. Again, there's more people there. Like, oh well, it's not only that you need evidence to support your belief, and that's when we got into the bit that I spoke earlier. But anyway, I think it's enough on that, really. I think we should get into the meat of tonight's topic, which is rationality, which, as I'm sure you can see, how it was inspired by today's conversations. So I suppose the first question is, what is rationality?
Okay, well, there's a couple of ways to look at this. The first is basically just a simple definition of rationality. There's different types of rationality, but if we start with a simple definition, rationality is basically reasoning according to rules of logic, probability theory, and in a coherent way, to put it simply.
So there's a few things in there that we probably need to go through for. What do we mean by logic?
Well, there's certain rules of logic. I can't remember what they are offhand. Hang on, let me just have a quick look.
Oh yeah, there's the 3 primary rules of logic. I've put it in an article recently.
Yeah, the law of contradiction, law of excluded middle, and principle of identity.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, so, and there's also making good inferences using valid arguments. So reasoning according to valid and sound arguments and using law, the rules of logic.
Yeah. So essentially what we're saying there is the first rule, I think, is something is what it is, basically,
Yeah.
isn't it? So if I'm having a discussion with you about a light switch, I'm not talking about a turnip.
Exactly. Something can't be both A and not A at the same time. If you're discussing properties of something, I suppose you can say something has 2 properties but they don't you can't have them sort of opposing each other. Like you can't have a light switch that's both on and off.
Right. Yeah. Especially if we're talking about a standard light switch, we're not talking about a dimmer switch. But even
then, you can't have it on and off.
No, exactly. It could be at different levels, but it's either on or off.
But it's mostly talking about, like you said, something can't both be an apple and not an apple.
Yeah. And then there's the law of the excluded middle ground as well, wasn't there? But again, it can't be. So that's again sort of if we're talking about something on and off, unless we get onto the quantum realm, which I don't think we should really get into.
No. But there are different types of logic as well that incorporate that kind of thing. But normally the most basic is the simple propositional logic.
Yeah, definitely. And then so obviously we've really briefly bastardized logic there.
It's a quick stream, you know what I mean? If people want us to go into more detail, we can. But this is more just getting the basic ideas out and across.
Yeah. And if you do have any questions on anything and want us to cover it off, as you know from the previous few streams, we cover any questions off right at the beginning of the stream. So if you've got any questions, you don't even have to watch the whole video if you don't want to. You just need to watch the beginning one. You can ask us on YouTube or Twitter or on Answers in Reason and articles or anything like that. DMs, both of our DMs are open to anyone.
Yeah, I show up on Twitter occasionally.
When I make him.
Yeah. I've got a dissertation to write and books to read,
Oh, to have that life.
Yeah, it's coming to an end next month.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, 6 years of study. 5 years of study.
Amazing.
It's been fun.
Yeah, amazing. And obviously it's given you this wealth of knowledge that you will attest is not enough. And there are
Or
people...
poverty of knowledge.
Yes, you're starting to realize how much you really don't know. Which is unfortunately the problem with a lot of people who discuss topics like this, is the fact that they think they know it all because they don't know enough.
Yeah, that's very true.
What do we call that, Dave?
Kruger and Dunning dinner? The Freddy Krueger effect?
Oh, if only it had actually been called the Freddy Krueger effect.
It would have been good.
I think we need to make some memes and some t-shirts. Have the graph and then his claw coming out of it.
That would be good, actually. But yeah, it's that there is a lot of that goes on, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we're all guilty of it. We all subject to it at times, especially when we're new to a topic and we hear a few bits of information for it. We're always guilty of thinking we understand the totality of said topic, which is very rarely the case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guilty of it. You know, it's part of human nature. It's how we're built.
So the next one that we supposedly have to cover off there then is probability theory. So that one might be a little bit more self-explanatory for people, but Dave, would you like to explain that?
That's quite a big topic, and it's about using sets and maths and formulas to work out what is most likely out of any situation. So if you would be going against probability theory if you were to work out in some manner that it's raining outside and you use some sort of calculation to work out that you're less likely to get wet if you take an umbrella out than if you take an umbrella out.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's basically, in a way, what you think, if you're basing a belief off of this, what you think is most probable. So again, if we go with the bridge example, if I think it's most probable that the bridge is going to take my weight as I go over it, that would be one way to say that, you know, I've used probability theory. Obviously, there'd be other parts of my reasoning there to make it a fully rational belief, but in really basic terms, that's what it is. And if you do want to know more about it, then again, ask the question and we will explain it a little bit more. And the last one that you mentioned there was coherence. So consistency and coherence. I mean, would you like to explain a little bit more on that one for us as well?
Yeah, basically, you have a large set of beliefs and ideas, and it's quite easy to have two opposing beliefs if you're not careful. So if you believe that crossing the bridge will collapse if you go onto it, but yet you think that to get to the other side, it's best to cross the bridge, you sort of hold an incoherent belief. Or if you believe that it's raining outside, but you'll get a suntan, you've got a kind of incoherent belief. Consistent and coherent beliefs are beliefs that match together in a set and go together and complement each other, rather than contradict or oppose each other.
And the word for a contradictory belief is obviously cognitive dissonance.
Sort of, but cognitive dissonance is when you hold two different beliefs that are opposing and they cause you some kind of discomfort and anger. So when one of them's challenged, you get angry because your beliefs have formed around these contradictory beliefs.
So I suppose that's one of the things that people go through as well when they're being questioned about things like their faith. They might obviously start getting more wound up with it because they're starting to believe that maybe their beliefs are irrational, etc. But they've got so much of their identity tied to these beliefs that actually they're getting incredibly worked up by them.
Exactly, and that's why the Socratic method can make people angry.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, even when it gets used on me, and I'm aware it's happening, it still happens. Even if I'm sort of on the same page, because it's making you tear down all of your foundations and think about everything in such a degree. It's making your brain work overtime, really, isn't it?
It does, and it can highlight these contradictory beliefs. And I suppose if you have this belief that your beliefs are fully consistent and these start popping up, it can cause you a bit of a spin.
Yeah, or even just the realization that maybe you don't know quite as much as you thought you did. That in itself, like if you're someone that sees yourself as someone who's quite knowledgeable about things, you might somehow think, oh yeah, well I know everything about everything, etc., etc. And suddenly you realize someone's questioning you and it's making you go, oh crap.
Yeah.
I don't know as much as I thought I did.
In the Meno, Socrates gets accused of being like a stingray, sort of, where his method and questioning makes somebody numb as if they've been stung because they realize what little they actually know compared to what they think they know.
That's interesting. I really need to get on and read that.
It's quite short. You can read it in an evening.
Oh, can I?
And I've got a stack of commentary on it if you ever need it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, definitely. It's one of those ones that, when you just intend to get round to reading, but you never actually do. I've got quite a few bits and bobs like that I fully intend to get round to reading them, but I just don't seem to get there.
Yeah, I've got like 5 carrier bags full worth of books that I'm going to start on as soon as my degree's finished.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I've got a stack of books piling up over there. I'm having to actually start packing away all the ones that I've read a few times because I'm running out of room in the house.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, not everybody has the time to read. Life's just not like that, unfortunately. I've just been very lucky the last few years.
Yeah, I wish I did have time all the time. But yeah.
It's why I want to become an academic. I can just sit around reading and writing papers all day.
That sounds awesome. That sounds really awesome.
It does.
I mean, to be honest, I love doing all the blogging and the research into the various topics that I'm discussing and everything like that, and doing the podcasts and the videos, and I mean, having a mix on top of that. If that could be my job, that would be amazing. And if you want to help me achieve my dream, then please, subscribe, follow, join our Patreon page, and all of that stuff. And hopefully you can help us achieve our dream of being able to podcast, do videos, give articles, and pass on knowledge and things like that to all of you.
I keep forgetting that we're supposed to do self-promotion. I'm terrible at that kind of thing.
Yeah, it doesn't come naturally to me either. It just suddenly popped into my head. Oh, here's a segue that actually works for once.
But yeah, back to the topic. That's basically what rationality is: reasoning according to logic and probability theory and having coherent beliefs. But there's also another type of rationality that would be considered what you would call theoretical rationality, where you're working out ideas. But there's also something called practical rationality, which is if I want to go outside, the most reasonable and rational course of action is to open the door and step out. If I want food, the most practical and rational thing to do would be to make some and eat.
Yep.
So it's achieving your goals in a rational way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So yeah, those are the two major forms of rationality.
So the question is, why is rationality important?
Because it can help us survive, help us think better, help us achieve our goals. It can help make the world better. We can learn more. It gets us closer to truth. There's a whole bunch of different reasons for why rationality is important. It can stop us forming false beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, there are false beliefs you can hold that aren't particularly important, but if you think going up to the snarling dog, foaming at the mouth, and petting it is good, you could probably do with a little bit of rationality.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Oh man. So, I mean, what do you think? Like some of the key irrational beliefs people have out there. Very common ones that you can think of right now.
I actually don't know, to be honest. It really depends on what you mean, because that's quite a difficult question. Because I could say now believing in God is irrational because I think there's no God. But there could be cases where it is rational because you've been taught that. The evidence, when you look at it, seems to indicate that. That's quite a hard one, to be honest. But an irrational belief would be diving into concrete would be good to learn swimming.
Fair. Actually, on that note, so one of the beliefs that we would probably say out there that is definitely an irrational belief would be something like young Earth creationism. We'd probably all agree that that is quite an irrational belief for someone to hold. However, there could be a rational way that someone holds that belief. I know that might sound crazy to you, but there definitely is. So if you consider someone who is homeschooled their entire life, they've got no actual experience of the rest of the world or anything that goes on, and they their entire experience is everything that they have been taught from their parents, their pastors. They've got no experience of the entire world, so their entire wealth of knowledge does come from the Bible and their parents and their pastor. It's all they know. So technically they are rational in their belief, even though we wouldn't typically think of that belief as a rational one. But here's the but: when they suddenly come across, say, some new evidence, right? So they come out into the real world, they finally leave the homestead, they get a real job, and all of a sudden they are introduced to the world of thought, shall we say, and they learn all of this information. All of a sudden they are introduced to the evidence that actually all these various dating methods and all these sorts of things like that back up the fact that the Earth isn't quite as young as they think it is. At that point, it becomes an irrational belief to maintain said beliefs.
Exactly. I was just going to say something similar to that. Another kind of irrational belief, I guess you could say, and this one's kind of common, is that all claims must be backed up by scientific evidence.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. And it's good to throw it back and forth, because that is something that we commonly hear from some of our fellow atheists.
Yeah.
And
there are claims. Yeah, there are claims that you can accept that don't need scientific evidence and might not even have scientific evidence that could back them up.
Hi, my name's Joe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I could ask you for evidence to back it up, but it would be irrational for me to do it because I know you and I know you're an honest person, and you know.
And there's some logical reasoning, some probability theory thrown in there. People tend not to lie about their names unless they're trying to con you. And so right now, I'm not trying to con any of you. I'm not trying to con Dave. He's friends with me on Facebook as well, so you can see my name there. That's still not an official ID. Anyone can call themselves anything. Hell, even if I could produce you my birth certificate and driving license or learner's permit, that still doesn't mean that that's definitely true. It could be quite easily said that my ID could be fake. So how
Well,
does anyone really prove who they are without going to a government site? And even then, that evidence could be false. I once knew a girl who there'd been a records error, and they got her date of birth wrong by 1 day and 1 year. So she was actually officially 1 year younger, and there was no way she could contest that. So on record, her proof of who she was is wrong.
Exactly, and that's actually kind of a good segue, because you remember I said that there's also a way of looking at rationality as a kind of virtue.
Yep.
Okay, so rationality is a virtue. It's supposed to be something that helps us in life. It's supposed to be a good thing. It's supposed to be of value.
Right.
So rationality is, if you think of virtue in terms of a mean between, in the case of rationality, between being over skeptical
Mm-hmm.
and over incredulity.
Yeah.
Incredulous. Sorry, like I say, I'm very tired tonight. You'll have to excuse me. Over incredulous, where you accept all claims, or you're so skeptical you won't even believe somebody when they tell you their name. It's supposed to be a way of helping us to achieve things like getting to truth, getting to the shop, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you ask somebody at the bus stop, has the bus been, and they say no, and you say, well, can you show me GPS to show me that the bus hasn't been? You're not being reasonable and you're not being rational. You're asking for more than can probably be given and more than is necessary. And you're also being so skeptical, you're stopping yourself from actually getting to the truth. You're denying a truth simply because you have this need to be so skeptical, everything has to be evidence-based.
It sort of breaks away from real skepticism into denialism or pseudo-skepticism, doesn't it?
Yeah, consider it something sort of like cynicism, where everything's a lie, unless you can show me hard, solid evidence. But if you want to be that skeptical, you can actually keep going until you show that there is no such thing as knowledge. That's the point of the brain in the vat, and that's basically Hume's case, that you can be over skeptical.
Yeah, most definitely.
And hence why I say rationality is also a virtue, or it can be seen in terms of virtue.
I mean, we've already discussed a few things that I think we need to come back to in other episodes. We need to come back to virtue, perhaps in more detail. We have got a podcast that talks about virtue a little bit. We need to come back to skepticism and maybe denialism as well. Again, we do have an episode on our on Fresh Air in season 1 about skepticism. Also, the start of season 3, which is yet to be released, starts with Cartesian skepticism and how it's used to reflect inwards on yourself. So I'd suggest having a listen to both of those. Dave's also done an article on that, Descartes, skepticism, and you. Again, sort of using skepticism as a mirror to your own beliefs, which can be an incredibly useful tool and something all of us should learn to do better, and none of us are particularly good at doing. A little bit of self-reflection, basically.
Yeah, even me, it took me a lot of learning over the years to actually understand just how little I know, but how much I thought I knew.
Yeah, I mean, we're all guilty of that, though, aren't we, really?
Yeah. If you learn the Socratic method and you start using it on yourself, you'll realize just sort of how weirdly formed all your concepts and beliefs might be. Because often we'll pick up a concept and just take it on board because somebody we respect or somebody who is respected in our community has said it. And we've taken it on board without question because it sounds smart. But then we don't realize that it contradicts something else that we also believe because we haven't really looked into it that much. And that's part of rationality, is going through all your beliefs and making sure that they don't contradict like that.
So yeah, definitely we'll come back to skepticism at some point in the future. I think Martijn might be interested in joining us for that one as well. So that might even be, at least in brief, next week. But I would suggest, if it is something that you might be interested in, having a listen to those shows and coming at us with some questions ahead of schedule. As Dave says, it is part of rationality. I mean, especially the introspective part of it. Just to make sure that if you are someone who claims to be rational, who wants to be rational, then, you know, do everything you can to be rational.
That's it. It's more than just claiming it. It's actually doing it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, there's something else that sort of came out in our conversations that we were having earlier with people. And it was the attitude that if someone holds one irrational belief, then they are an irrational person. Do you think that to be the case, Dave?
No. I mean, if you go into the rationality debate, you will find on one side people say that humans are not rational because we often behave in irrational ways, therefore we're not rational. And that would apply to everybody because we all have these cognitive biases. We all have heuristics in our thinking. Many of us act unthinkingly, even though we're pretty sure that we think in a reasoned way. So you could argue that nobody is actually rational. And maybe that's what they're arguing. But no, one rational belief doesn't make somebody irrational. It just makes them have an irrational belief.
In fact,
Or at least
we will all have irrational beliefs at some point in our life, and we, you know, even if they're pointed out to us, it can be hard to let go of them because we're anchored into our various beliefs. It can be really hard to let go of them, can't it?
Exactly.
And that doesn't mean that we're irrational in every aspect of our life. So the people out there who think all theists are irrational because they think the God belief is irrational. Now, let's just, I'm not necessarily saying this is true, but let's just say if all God beliefs were definitely irrational, it doesn't necessarily make these people wholly irrational in themselves, because every other aspect of their life they might still deal with in a completely rational way. So you can't make a blanket statement like all theists are irrational, because they all believe for different reasons. They all have looked into different things. They've all seen different evidence, all had different experiences. You can't just say that they're completely irrational, even if you think the God belief is one thing that is always irrational. And I think it's quite unfair to say so. And I think it looks bad on us to say so as well.
Exactly. And if you think about it in this way, most people claim the God belief is irrational because they start from certain axioms of what they consider to be a rational belief. Like, say, if you believe something without scientific evidence, then you're irrational. God has no scientific evidence, therefore it's irrational. Seems to be a bit of a sloppy argument because you hold the belief that all beliefs need scientific evidence. Where's the scientific evidence that all beliefs require scientific evidence?
And then comes the claim, you can't prove a negative, which again is a bit of an irrational one because there are certain negatives that you definitely can prove.
Exactly. It's too sweeping of a statement about beliefs.
Yeah.
Rationality, like, take for example, if you say Jesus was, according to the Bible, Jesus was crucified and then resurrected. I know there's a lot of people that believe in an actual resurrection, but textual analysis could show something like it's the way the story has been told, and it's got a deeper meaning that maybe has been lost over time. So if you believe it's just a story that has a deeper meaning that's sort of been lost over time, you're not really irrational for believing that Jesus was resurrected in that sense, because you think it's telling a different kind of truth. Like Aesop's fables, it has certain meanings and certain moral lessons.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
It all depends on how you interpret stuff. And we each live inside our own heads, and we each have certain beliefs about certain things, and we can only know from our own experiences and know from any information that we hold and form beliefs from those.
Yeah, so, I mean, at the end of the day, as Dave says, there's could be perfectly rational reasons to believe anything. I mean, what if someone holds, a belief that the Bible is basically a metaphorical story that is trying to give us an indication of certain things that we don't know exactly to be true, and or say like the more deist approach of, you could say that, well, there's an argument from incredulity because you can't see how else it started. Or a God of the Gaps argument or anything like that, but actually they might have a pretty good foundation for thinking that's the case. The fact of the matter is that is one thing that we don't really know at all. We can talk about the process of the Big Bang and the things that we can see happening, but when it comes down to it, there is no definitive way to decipher what's the correct thing with that. So perhaps some of these people do actually hold a rational belief in a god, and perhaps if it was ever shown that this was a different thing, they might have a different story. They might change their belief, because at the moment they've used probability theory to reason that actually this is the most likely thing based on our current knowledge, and if we got more knowledge, they might change it.
Exactly. It's more nuanced than most people think it is. I mean, most people probably are just using rationality in the sense of, well, if you believe these certain principles, then you're rational. And that's more part of rationality than what rationality is itself, if you get what I mean. So yeah, it is more nuanced than that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're really skirting around the topic of rationality tonight, and we are gonna wrap it up relatively soon as well. So if it is a topic you're interested in, if you're interested in the rationality debate, then it's definitely something. Ask us some questions on it, and we'll cover them off specifically next time. There is something I do think that we should potentially cover off. I don't know if we have already, and my brain's jumped out, but it's the people can only be as rational as they can be. So I sort of covered that off with the creationists, didn't I? In the fact that they held the rational belief there. So if we consider a child, they don't necessarily have the critical thinking skills to reason in the way. So it's perfectly rational for them to believe what their dad says, what their mum says, what their guardian, their teacher. They just take it as the information they are given. And that, for them, is perfectly rational. Now, obviously, children aren't necessarily the most rational creatures in the world, and we're not making that claim, but they are as rational as they can be. And that's the bit that I think that you need to focus on there. Some people can only be as rational as they can be. Now, on the other hand, if I believe something just because my dad said, that would not be a rational behaviour for me to demonstrate. Unless it was him who had done a degree in bioengineering and he was speaking specifically on that topic, then I could reason that actually he knows what he's talking about. But let's say he was an evolutionary biologist who had spent no real time discussing philosophy and then made claims like philosophy's dead and you just believed it because it came from him. That would be quite an irrational belief for you to hold and accept from them simply because someone you respected who has no real clue about the field said so.
Okay, I've got a good example for you here. Have you seen The Truman Show?
I have, yes.
Okay, and I would assume most people have by now because it's from, what, 98, 99, something like that?
Spoilers!
Yeah, if you haven't seen it by now, switch off, go off, watch it, because it's a brilliant film. Here's an example of the idea that people can only be as rational as they can be. If you imagine Jim Carrey's character, would you say he was irrational for believing those actors were his friends and the woman was his wife and loved him?
No.
You,
I mean, it's
no,
almost a metaphor for the allegory of the cave, isn't it?
it is, and it's also a metaphor for gettier cases with justified true belief, where we might think that we have justifications and it might be true, but it's not exactly justified, and it's quite complicated. But in the sense of the story, we would be irrational for believing that the wife loved him and was who she was, because we have extra information on top of the Truman character that are rational defeaters for his beliefs. But he doesn't have those rational defeaters. He lives inside an environment that makes everything appear to be exactly as he thinks it is. So he holds a rational belief in the context of his environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I mean, if he was given more information, and I mean, this does happen at little parts throughout the movie, doesn't it? People try and let him know what's going on, and when he was younger, they managed to pass it off. But as he got older, he all of a sudden was a little bit more like, hang on, something's going on here.
Yeah, he started to put it together more and more. But if you think about it, even in the context of how we live, those people that came in and tried to inform him could be considered like conspiracy theorists that we would consider today, where, they're just crazy and they're spouting off nonsense.
And if everyone else was saying that, I mean, it might be a bit of an ad populum, but if everybody else around you that you love and you trust are saying that person over there is crazy, chances are you're going to believe them.
Exactly.
No reason not to.
Exactly. And in the context of how he trusted these people and believed that they were his friends and his wife and his mum, he would be rational to go with what they were indicating. But it would be irrational for us because we have that extra information on top. We have the ability to look at it in a more rational way, simply because we're more informed in the context of the story. Does that make sense as a metaphor?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or analogy, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. Hopefully it made sense to all of you out there as well. If it didn't, please let us know.
Yeah.
Also, anyone who wants any questions and you're on Twitch right now, please, let us know in the chat room. I can see a couple of you're watching, but please say hello. We're not that scary.
I am.
I'm not. I've got a Thundercats t-shirt on.
I've got a Barney Rubble t-shirt.
Do you know, at school that was my nickname for a little while.
Yeah, mine says "Ask the Missus," just so I can remember who's in charge.
Brilliant.
So yeah, that going back to rationality. Sorry, I tend to tangent a lot when I'm tired. That's why I say rationality is more nuanced than people seem to think, where it's just this specific claim, it's irrational to believe so-and-so. Well, in the case of the Truman Show, it would be irrational to believe, if you were to make a statement like it's irrational to believe actors playing the part of your wife love you, well, yeah. But in the case of the Truman Show, he didn't know it was an actor, even though she was an actor.
Yeah.
So the belief isn't irrational because, as far as he was concerned, she was his wife. So rationality, it's more nuanced than many people seem to think it is.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything more you think we need to cover off it tonight, Dave?
No. As a quick rundown of rationality, that sort of gives some ideas of the basics. And like I say, I'd love to go into more detail in the future.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I really enjoyed the conversations that we've had on it in the past, and the articles that you've given me links to and stuff like that, and reading into them. Yeah, it's a great topic.
Yeah, if you want a good introduction into rationality and the rationality debate, I think it's Stein Without Good Reason. That's one of the best. It's kind of a hard read. It took me a couple of reads just to sort of get the basics of it, but I'm not particularly smart. So, but yeah, it's a good read and it will help.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, if you can find the link to that as well, Dave, I'll try and put it in the notes for the show when we come to when we come to publish it is what I meant to say. But words are doing the hard thing where they're not working properly.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
I'm desperate for this week to be over. I've actually got next week off of work.
Nice.
Yeah, and I'm very much looking forward to doing. I mean, this is kind of bad, but not much of anything. I've actually got lots of stuff I need to do, though. Unfortunately.
Yeah, but it gives you the option of doing it leisurely rather than fitting it in between everything else.
Definitely. So yeah, I mean that's my main plan for next week. I've got to do some stuff around the house, but maybe it'll give us a bit more opportunity to maybe have an extra stream or two like that throughout the week.
That would be awesome. And don't forget, next week we've got Martijn on.
Yeah, so next week we've actually got a bunch of stuff happening. We've got Martijn coming on to talk about Black Lives Matter. He's got a couple of topics he wants to talk about. He also wants to do a bit on power, but we might save that for the Fresh Air podcast. I don't know if we're going to necessarily stream. We might simulcast the stream as we're recording the podcast, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see how the technology fares. But that could potentially be something that we look at doing. And then also we've got Josh from Little Philosophers coming on next week talking about philosophy for kids and his own podcast. That should be on either the 2nd or 3rd. And I think on Tuesday, we're back on Cheshire's stream. Now, if you didn't see that, we were talking about Aaron Ra's article. And we managed to... Oh, hey, Josh, he's actually listening. I can see the chat room. I need to remember to look at that screen over there when I'm talking because he's over there.
Yeah, I've got I just loaded the stream up a few minutes ago and he's right there.
Yeah, he says he can't wait for part 2 either. So, yeah, it was definitely an entertaining show. We were discussing his article where he's basically arguing for his form of Lacktheism and eventually getting onto why rocks are atheist in his view. So
it was fun, yeah. it was different.
Yeah. It's nice to have a different dynamic, nice to have someone to chat to that was different, which is another thing that we're hoping with Josh as well, because he will be with us having a chat about Little Philosophers. He's doing basically little stories for kids, and asking them a load of different questions at the end, trying to get their brains working and thinking about things. So and we're just
Josh is brilliant.
Yeah, he is. He definitely is. I can't wait to have him on and see what we're going to talk about philosophy for kids and all that sort of stuff.
And Randall Rouser has offered to come on as well, so hopefully we'll get that sorted out.
Oh yeah, you know what? I forgot about that. He's the tentative apologist or something like that, isn't he?
That's right. He's actually a doctor, and he's quite an interesting guy, to be honest.
Awesome. So we've got lots of good stuff coming up for you, but I suppose we need to get on with the final part of the show, which we do right at the end. Are you ready, Dave?
I'm never ready, but go for it.
All right, so now it's time for the quick fire round. So if this is the first time listening, the quick fire round is basic like a standard quiz show in the sense that I ask questions to Dave and he has to give a quick, snappy answer as quick as possible. Hopefully, one word or one sentence answers. Now, a lot of the questions are actually far more complex, so if Dave feels the need to clarify, he can do it at the end. Or if you're interested in the conversation, then please feel free to ask us any questions. That's what we did today with Jared. That's what we did last time with Ronnie's question. We will answer any questions that you have on the subject. So, here we go. Dave, what's your favourite subject within philosophy?
Ethics.
What's your least favourite subject within philosophy?
There's a least favorite subject in philosophy?
If there was one philosophical question you could get the answer to right now, as in an unresolved one, which would it be?
Does God exist?